It is kind of funny because every firm that I talk to, they say, well, yeah, but we're a little bit different. But after, sitting in so many different offices, the concerns all really boil down to very similar things, right? And it's human nature, really. I like to say that I'm technology agnostic. So whatever the tool is, whether it has a name or it's just a script, it doesn't really matter as long as it's meeting the business objectives and can be sort of instituted or enforced across the whole project team.
We've got a really exciting episode for you today with Tyler Putnam from our own team at Integrated Projects. In our conversation, Tyler shares his experience wearing multiple hats as a licensed architect, technologist, and sales leader in the AEC industry, and even how he uses architectural skill to get equity in a newly constructed bar in Brooklyn, New York. Tyler talked how firms can think about the CAD to BIM paradigm shift, how his previous boss suggested sales as the next natural step from his experience in computational design. So whether you're a BIM manager at an architectural firm or just getting started with sales in the architecture and industry, you're going to get real value from Tyler's insights. So let's get into it. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Buildings 2.0. Today I'm speaking with Tyler Putnam, our own senior solutions engineer here at Integrated Projects. Tyler, thanks for chatting with me today.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
You've got a lot going on. You're the co-founder of Figure Ground design firm. You're working with us. You've built a bar. You're teaching at Cooper Union. Tell us what you got going on.
Yeah, I have kind of an irresponsible amount of things going on outside of helping to grow integrated projects. We've got a fabrication business that we focus on high-end furniture, millwork called Figure Ground. But I have a sister company called Solid Void that is kind of positing an architectural practice as equity investor. Mm-hmm. So that's where the bar kind of fits in. So I have a minority stake in many of the architecture projects that I lift off the ground. And then conveniently, I have a fabrication business that can help us maintain control and quality, cost, and all of that.
Architecture design services for equity is something that I've heard about, but haven't quite seen much of it in practice. I mean, what prompted the idea to approach it that way?
Yeah, so I mean, it's interesting because I was brought to New York by going to architecture school at Cooper Union. It's a fantastic school. The discipline of architecture is like the most amazing study, and all the projects that you end up getting into there are ideating about these beautiful kind of concepts of blending culture, space, logistics, finance. I mean, you have to be sort of a Renaissance man, and that's really what I fell in love with architecture. And then you start working in the field and in the industry, and what I had found, what I think many of my peers in architecture found, is that sort of creative vision of being able to blend so many different disciplines and concepts together for, to build spaces is really relegated to those who are closest to the money and making the decisions. But they are often, just motivated by, a subset of the concerns that I think, the architecture discipline kind of trains you to do. So the kind of posit with architecture as equity is to kind of move back or give back some of the responsibility that, maybe the 15th, 16th, 17th century architecture discipline used to kind of have, which, has over the decades has sort of bifurcated into the architect really just at this point being a glorified kind of coordinator of subcontracting responsibilities or sub-consultant responsibilities. So what I have found is that when we can align the architecture practice and discipline with like the goals of the project and owner representation and construction and all of that, there's like tremendous amounts of value for that, kind of vertical integration, if you will.
How did we get here? So how did the architecture practice kind of devolve to coordinating subs?
I think it's a natural kind of byproduct. I mean, there was a time, right, when architects were the builders, right? So like all of the architects were really like the design builders. And I think it's sort of it's a natural byproduct of projects becoming more specialized, more complicated, that you have to have, just more kind of specialties kind of developed. But I think the architect in particular has lost something sort of essential in that role, sort of an essential agency in the project.
Notably, your role at IP is not necessarily the design of buildings, but oftentimes like the design of processes themselves. I'm
Yeah.
curious how you started to blend the practice of architecture, right, kind of traditional design, combined with some of the technology that we're grappling with on a day to day, combined with some of the business practices that are necessary to grow up a startup. I mean, you're kind of at the intersection of this stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting intersection. So almost directly once I got into, professional architecture offices, and mostly my background is in, the kind of high-end corporate architecture. What I found was that not all disciplines adopt technology at the same rate, and they don't all, sort of mature in the same rate. So I'm from California, where like really early on I got into web development and programming and all of this stuff just by osmosis of like Silicon Valley and that kind of culture. So when I got to New York and I got stuck in a room doing flashing details and parking lot calculations for months on end, I couldn't help but think, just doing drudgery of, CAD production, that I couldn't figure out Lisp a little bit enough to automate. And as soon as I started doing that, ripples went through, and I stopped doing stopped doing parking lot calculations, and I started just like writing scripts. Later on, that would be sort of known as like, computational design. So I got really good at that. And the logical extension of that is just data management in general. So for years, I was consulting for, firms like SOM and Gensler, KPF, HOK, HKS, et cetera, and more of leveraging technology for production and process workflow. Then I realized actually it all needs to be very strictly business aligned with the real KPIs and goals of these companies. So that kind of brought me into a lot of the business concerns. So yeah, kind of a strange path, but
And part of that path was you're at the front lines of what I'd consider to be a broader paradigm shift from a CAD centric design workflow to a BIM centric design workflow. You've had the opportunity to sit on the front row across really big firms. Are there recurring themes that you see, either challenges firms face when going from one paradigm to the other? Is there common misunderstandings? How do you see that transition, and why do you think firms have maybe been slow to do it?
yeah, absolutely. There's definitely trends. It is kind of funny because every firm that I talk to, they say, well, yeah, but we're a little bit different. But after, sitting in so many different offices, the concerns all really boil down to very similar things, right? And it's human nature, really. I like to say that I'm technology agnostic. So whatever the tool is, whether it has a name or it's just a script, it doesn't really matter as long as it's meeting the business objectives and can be sort of instituted or enforced across the whole project team. And maybe it's not even technologies, right? Maybe it's just a standardization. Maybe it's a process. Maybe it's a training issue, things like that. But the question of, migrating from CAD to BIM, although this conversation has now been going on for 20 years, I can't believe that it's still that large of a concern. I mean, the statistics are very well known. As an architect, you'll have a 91% reduction of errors and emissions if you run a BIM project correctly versus a CAD project. 51% reduction of field unverified, request for informations. The list of statistics goes on. But I totally sympathize with how difficult it is to migrate a firm from, an entrenched kind of process and technology of what you have to, something new. Because there's quite an investment, and I think firms that are struggling with it really need to consider it as an investment. It's going to take time. So, like developing a good roadmap, a good implementation strategy, and having a kind of holistic view, right? Like I've seen it fail again and again. And the way that it fails is you have to have every department on board with this sort of singular mission to bring a company all the way down to HR.
Walk me through that. So you talked about connecting this transformation to business objectives. Like what does that practically look like for a firm?
So first of all, it's you're asking people to change, and change is never easy. If something's already in motion, right, it's going to stay that way. So there's a sort of disruption that happens, and it is systemic across all parts of the business. So if you move from a CAD-oriented workflow whereby like just the data and the process and the standards that you're managing are honestly very simple relative to a complex workflow like BIM and downstream related technologies and computational design, energy analysis, digital twins, etc. The more of that data that you have, the more you're actually just changing the roles and the responsibilities of the employees themselves. So that's why, I kind of mentioned like, marketing, HR, operations. It has to be considered from, the entire business, right? It has to be like a business goal. If it's only driven in kind of one of these vectors, that's where you're going to have, sort of not a great implementation.
To shift gears, Scan-to-BIM, it's a subsect of a larger design build process, but it's an important one. What have you seen in your role as senior solutions engineer when talking to either architects, engineers, construction managers, or owners? What and why does Scan-to-BIM even matter?
Yeah, the industry is really varied in terms of its, let's say digital transformation maturity. And, I would consider the BIM model as sort of the center piece that starts to unlock the value for all kinds of things downstream. And so if we consider the BIM as the single source of like digital truth, laser scanning is sort of the single source of truth for the analog world. So just the visualization, the quantification, the verification of existing conditions will all of a sudden align stakeholders such that they are speaking in the same terms and looking at the same thing. That team alignment is tremendously valuable. And then obviously all of that just unlocks further value the deeper down that rabbit hole you go.
And I mean, is that true across like architects, engineers, owners? I mean, are there nuances across, say, an architect's need for Scan-to-BIM versus an owner? Is it the same? How do you think about that?
Yeah, a large part of the friction of erecting, a building or a large complicated project is that you have so many different stakeholders with so many different concerns, and everybody is playing their particular part. So a BIM model is used, for design intent, for design optioneering, for rendering, for visualization, for narrative, all of that on the architecture and MEP sides, right? Also calculations, etc. But then downstream for construction, it's used in pre-construction services. It's used in virtual design and construction as elements are being installed, verified. They can be clashed together spatially. They can be used for material inventory and procurement. So, the list goes on. And then from the owner's perspective, there's sort of, maybe last to the party, but honestly, the most value to gain, right? They have the biggest risk profile on the project, and as such, they have sort of the most to gain. And I think that's where we are in the industry now with a lot of the buzzwords of digital twin, that are being sort of implemented with varying degrees of success or maybe skepticism. Yeah, we're very much there. And, from their perspective, they're not using the BIM or laser scanning in any of these ways. They have a whole variety of different concerns with asset management, with space verification, with occupancy, with facilities management. So they have a whole different host of concerns. But I guess that's why it's important to think about the entire project as a single source of truth that unifies all of these different stakeholders with all of their various different uses. Also, why it's a little bit difficult to, have one kind of conversation around this.
I mean, you've mentioned this, but digital twins, scanning, BIM, these are nothing new. And yet it seems like we're still working towards a brighter future. Like what is that brighter future like 10 years from now? Assuming that we as an industry mature, adapt, and implement this at scale, what's 10 years from now, what can an owner look forward to? Like what is uniquely unlocked if we do what we got to do as an industry?
Yeah, I think that the basic question for an owner is, what do I own? And what articulation do I have over what I own? And further to that point, what does ownership look like as, building materials and equipment starts to age with time, and as spaces become reused and repurposed and reshuffled, and to what level and what degree do I have the information readily that I can make qualified decisions and also quick decisions? How fast can we make decisions about these, very, large financial implications, and by virtue of that, large human life safety, kind of concerns as well, right? So I think the more data, the more technology, the more sort of standardized the process and the QA/QC and all of that is connected, the better actionable decisions that we can make, whether those are environmental concerns, cultural concerns, financial concerns.
But to contrast that, so for let's say a real estate team that might suggest, well, Tyler, we've got our CADs, we've got our PDFs, we've got some spreadsheets, tracking inventory of materials, we got photos saved in folders of rooms. Might not be perfect, but it's working. I mean, what's the paradigm shift that we're talking about from a kind of a digital twin to where most of the industry is now through kind of a sorted collection of spreadsheets and PDFs and photos?
When it comes to that kind of question, historically, it's, I'll walk a job site or a campus with a facilities manager, and he's got a key ring larger than my head with skeleton keys that, unlock half of the doors that need to. He has, the security codes memorized you know in his fingertips. He's the only one that holds the keys to the palace, basically. From a risk profile standpoint alone, that's just not a warm, settling practice if I was an owner. So I think by having all of this data easily accessible to, you know whoever needs it at whatever time, and to not have it sort of siloed, in these very kind of delicate or precarious, kind of places. If I was an owner, which I am, and I have a digital twin of my bar, I have a digital twin of, my apartment, I have a digital twin basically of every space that I've designed, and I can sleep very well at night. Let's put it that way.
You've been an advocate for innovating the buying process of design services and even our services at IPX. I mean, one of the things that I get really excited about is some of the work you've been leading on just making the buying process, the RFP process, this kind of very reactive, like design, bid, build process, just slightly better. things that we're working at IAPX is just trying to make things like pricing predictable, turnaround times predictable, like streamlining contract workflows. Can you give us a sense as to like where the industry is at today versus what it could look like in terms of just making buying less crappy?
Yeah, there's been a lot of advancements, right? I mean, Autodesk, it has spent something like $6 billion over the last couple of years to start bringing a lot of the kind of technology and process to the construction space. Before that, it was a lot of the design team, architects, that got a lot of, you know, features and innovations in the space. Owners haven't had a tremendous amount of investment yet, so they're sort of the laggards of all of this. But in a certain way, that also makes sense, right? It's sort of there's a reason why the architects and engineers were like the first to kind of adopt and to get the most mature in this space, and then construction, and then finally owners. I mean, it literally just follows like the construction life cycle of a building. But there's still a lot of pockets and holes in there that have not been solved for. And on the architecture and design side, it's actually the question goes back to the owners once again, which is the procurement and the description of the existing condition that the architect is supposed to start from. That's the owner is actually supposed to be supplying that. So if the owner has not yet fully been entrenched into the maturity of this digital transformation, then the very beginning of this entire process is broken. And just as well as I do, we used to work, at the same architecture firm. All of my peers in architecture, starting a project is really fun, right? Conceptual design, and you get to exercise all of this creativity and all of that. But it's also the most frustrating part because you have nothing to start with. And, at architecture school, what's the first thing that you do? Build your site, get your existing conditions going, get a model going. And, in New York, the way that we would do that back in the day is we literally ride fixie bicycles around with a tape measure, and we go and we take photos and we count bricks and, do all of that, which is incredibly time consuming, so that we can build these models. And then you have your existing conditions, you do your site analysis, so on and so forth. But sounds really inefficient. And I did it. And it was very inefficient.
To jump off that, it wouldn't be a technology podcast if I didn't ask about AI and ML. What are practical use cases that you've actually seen that are useful in our space?
There's a lot of amazing artificial intelligence solutions that are going on. There's a blog that I follow. I should plug it. I can't remember the name of it now, but it keeps track of all the various different advancements. The one thing to know about new technologies, generally speaking, whenever there's, cryptocurrency all of a sudden becomes a buzzword, artificial intelligence or machine learning. I mean, AR and VR, right? Like the general industry, it's going to be a very horizontal kind of solution space, whereby you have a lot of people that are trying to figure out the kind of solutions. And so during that early kind of leading edge of these technologies, you have lots of different approaches that are not well connected, and there isn't sort of the one conglomerating, monopoly, like go-to solution. And that's where we are with artificial intelligence for sure. So there's like, I could rattle off like 20 different companies that are doing really amazing stuff, but none of them have the thing that has like totally figured it out. But I mean, to name a couple, I think, what the guys at Evolve Lab are doing, they're doing really incredible stuff around automatic annotations, and their visual rendering engines are amazing and all of that kind of stuff. But really, the way that I think about artificial intelligence now, although it's kind of a buzzword in the industry and maybe polemic, and people like to talk about it in terms of job security, things like that, I'm actually not really concerned about that at all. But AI has been used for a long time, just by virtue, they're hidden underneath a user interface of like software applications that we use. And I think it's affecting all of us in these kind of invisible ways that, are not quite as explicit as, the open AIs or, these others in the world that are getting a lot of like limelight and attention. But ultimately what this does is it democratizes, or at least lowers the barrier of entry to doing some things that otherwise wouldn't be possible, or maybe they speed up a certain workflow. I mean, it's pretty incredible because I have a programming background, but honestly, like I've never really worked dedicated as a programmer long enough to like just keep JavaScript syntax under my fingers without, having to think about it, or Python, or, whatever it is. But me, along with Claude, I mean, we can whip together scripts really quickly and, implement it for whatever challenge it is. I think technology with startups and technologies, for me, it's less about what the technology is. I mentioned, I'm like very technology agnostic. It's more of like, what's the problem space and how intimately can we know the problem and how can we solve that problem?
I can't help but to think about how, as AI evolves and starts naturally with like point solutions, like helping us do these like very specific things, I do think inevitably it's going to just continue to further integrate and just further start to do what is often seen as just like straight up service. And as a byproduct, having an industry where we go from selling tools, like here is a kind of a rendering tool, or like here's a thing, to just straight up doing
Hmm.
services, like full blown A to Z, do it for you services. Do you see it the same way? And if so, are there impacts, right? Like that's going to have on the services industry, right? The architectural industry, the engineering industry, perhaps less obvious, but even in the construction industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, time will only tell, and I think it is really a matter of time. I'm a big fan of metrology and like the study of tools. It's completely impractical for me to have a wood shop in Brooklyn, right? I mean, I have a wood shop because I love tools and I love working with tools, and I think there's something, even in like the way that our hands have sort of evolved, and the tools that we use have evolved. I think there's an intrinsic relationship between humans and tools, and I don't think that that's going to go away, whether artificial intelligence is implemented or not. There's a world, of course, where like, you have the transhumanist cybernetic fusion and the singularity, whereby, maybe there's some paradigm leap, of course, but yeah, I don't know. I think it's humans like tools.
To shift to a just as polemic, but perhaps controversial topic, in at least in architecture spaces, sales. So sales is often seen as a dirty word in A and E circles. Why is that? It seems like in the technology space, it's kind of table stakes. In architecture, it's almost seems like we don't do sales. How do you straddle this?
Yeah, it's interesting because I have been working like kind of definitely in sales positions or sales adjacent positions in the last couple of years. I never thought that I would find myself there. So I was doing some technical consulting for a very large like design technology firm, helping out a lot of our clients. And I mentioned to, year-end review, I mentioned to my CEO, what's the job growth? What's the next place that I can move to? Everything that I'm doing, I can kind of do it in my sleep. Like, I'm not exactly feeling challenged. I'm working on like, the largest construction projects, in the world. And he said, well, yeah, you got to do sales. And I was completely blown away by this because I've been in, BIM manager positions and all this stuff. So I deal with a lot of vendors and a lot of salespeople. And I told him, I have a real allergy to sales. I don't think you're reading me correctly. And he kind of broke it down to me and he said, well, no, look, sales is about developing solutions for your customers. And you know the customers very well and you're very good at crafting solutions. And so I took it on, and then it turns out that that I really enjoy it, and I really like it, and that's really the way that I approach sales, and I really do believe that that's how sales should be. I think it's when you have misaligned motives, or you don't really care about that problem space, and you don't really care about or know the client. I think that's where the dirty word of sales comes from, because there's a lot of other motivations maybe that kind of get in the way.
This is something that I've always thought about, and I think I'm personally in a place in my career where out of necessity for the company, like this is just something I've had to embrace and get good at, or else at this point it's much larger problem than just my ego, but really for the sake of the company. I wonder if part of that dirty word of sales comes from maybe this thinking of like a traditional stereotype of like the salesy guy that just
Hmm.
shoves a particular product, whether or not it's good for you or not, down your throat.
Right.
It's just a good kind of talker, and yet
Definitely.
we're all we're all doing sales. So
Yeah.
in some form. So I mean, what's how do you see that paradigm shift? How do you reconcile the kind of the salesy bad kind of take of the past versus like what sales looks like today?
Yeah, I think we need to rethink how sales is done, and how sales is thought about. It really should be problem solving. When I'm approached by salespeople I always have to suss out and figure out what their motivation is. Do they know my problem? Are they looking out for my best interest? And are they actually trying to provide a solution? Or is there some other motivation, financial or otherwise? In large part, I don't always know. And I think if we're just honest and genuine about trying to solve problems, and if the people that are doing sales, if we understand the problem the best, can't help but see that working.
Do you have advice for folks that might be in a similar position where perhaps they've been sitting around different sides of the table, perhaps as a designer, then turned into kind of a computational, manager, and now find themselves actually wanting to take a similar leap as you? Is like maybe the next jump is sales.
It's actually interesting because I got into the whole digital design technology side of architecture, and I did that consulting for a good amount of time, and then I found myself in sales, and I'm actually finding that it's a small community. I'm actually finding that many of these people, the logical career growth is actually to get into, I'd say, not really sales necessarily, because even here, right, we don't really have a sales department. We have a solutions department. And I find the logical extension of it is to get into solutions or business development, because we're the closest to the technology and the process, but also have enough background and experience with the problem space. We just make good advisors. We all suffer from we're all probably pretty antisocial. We don't exactly have the kind of smooth operator charisma that a traditional salesperson would have, but we have, like, all the good parts of it, I guess.
I'm sure I'm going to butcher it. Picasso once said, if you talk to art critics, they'll spend their time talking about philosophy and meaning and purpose. And if you talk to artists themselves, they'll talk about like where to find the cheapest paint.
Yeah, right,
Uh,
right.
In your day to day, just to kind of get to the mechanics by which like you do your work. Tell us about a script or something that you've been able to build that just saved you either time or just was exponentially something that took you to the next level. I'm curious what you're putting together today.
Yeah, so I haven't been with IP for that long, but I anytime that I do something twice, I write it down. And then if I end up doing it again, then I write it down, or I add to it. So I have a very long running list and sort of a diagram of everything that I do every day, and everybody that would be on my team does every day. And then I try to make note of what takes the most time, what takes the most kind of context switching, or what if alleviated would make me happier as a person, or more efficient, or would kind of unblock revenue channels or what have you for the business. And then I try to prioritize those. And then whenever I have 5 minutes between the meeting, a client discovery call or something else, then I try to put together some kind of process or a template or something. I think probably the biggest one that I have developed so far is basically a kind of discovery form process that kicks off a cadence that creates an automated kind of proposal, like draft proposal. And that is super helpful because everything in there is there's no intrinsic value as to why a human has to do that. Like, we just have to supply the information, we have to know what's important, and we have to know the success criteria of a project and the boundaries and the whatever important vectors that go into it, the price, the schedule, the speed, whatever. But the actual mechanics of putting together a proposal is just drudgery. And what you end up doing on a lot of these projects, especially the more complicated ones, going through the RFP process is very laborious. There's lots of details. They're often written very poorly, and then you go through rounds of revisions, and the ability to basically just surface up proposals. I find it actually very aligned with our kind of stance on predictability, transparency, speed, accuracy, right? Because when somebody asks me for a proposal, if it takes me a week to get back to them, that's a week that I'm not helping them because they don't know, the cost, the schedule, the capabilities, et cetera, et cetera. So the faster that I can do that, the faster I'm actually unlocking the, design team or the owner or whomever to make a qualified decision about a project. And then, of course, it's great for me because I don't want to do that drudgery.
Well, I think a large part of the reason you're able to see through that is because you wear multiple hats. You haven't just sat down as a designer or builder, but now as an owner.
Mhm.
I guess maybe last question for you is to put, of the many hats you wear, you are part owner of a bar in Brooklyn. How's that been? And do you have a second one coming?
Yeah, it's gone really great. We opened it up 6 months ago, and I mean, my team is fantastic. So I don't do any of the operations of it. I have, there's general manager and others, and they're doing a fantastic job. So my job at this point really is to go to the bar and drink wine, which is the best. I'll give a shameless plug for it. It's called Million Goods. It's on 88 Franklin Avenue in Greenpoint, Brooklyn. It's right off the G. If you drop my name, they'll probably treat you pretty nice. And we are in talks about doing a second one, and we're looking at strangely enough, sounds a little bit random, but Mexico City.
That's gonna be fun. That's gonna be fun.
Yeah.
Tyler, this has been fun, and I'm sure part one of multiple parts here. But really excited for you hopping on. Thanks so much.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity.